Well, hello. My name is Yuri, and this will be my guide covering Timeline, Joan's new plugin for animation and koikatsu. We will be covering beginner to advanced concepts in this, and hopefully you'll be able to take something away from it before we are done. Now, before we get started, I'm gonna apologize in advance for my shitty accent. I know it's heavy on the ears. I hope it doesn't detract from actual information. I'm gonna try my best to speak as properly as I can. Now, what is Timeline exactly? I'm sure you guessed by now, but it's an animation tool. It's based on keyframes. It interpolates between keyframes. That means it tracks the changes and displays them to you between the keyframes. It's really well integrated with Joan's other plugins like KKPE, RendererEditor, and node constraints. Now, with all of that stuff out of the way, let's get started with the beginner stuff. Ctrl T to bring up or close the Timeline UI window. T for Timeline. Over here we have the time scrubber and keyframes. This is the main window. This is where most of the action will happen. As you can see, you can scrub through time manually if you want to. Here we have the play, pause, and stop buttons. They do what you expect them to do, and you should know what they do. Over here we have the frame rate, or the target frame rate. I'm not sure. I don't know what everything does. Honestly, I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, correct me on this, please. Below, we have the exact time on the time scrubber. This is for fine-tuning if you really want to go somewhere. The duration of the animation. My animation is 30 seconds long, as you can see. Block length divisions. This refers to how big these columns are. These columns are 1 second long to help you categorize and divide your keyframes properly, and also they deal with snapping a specific keyframe to these columns. If you, for example, make it half, these columns will be half as large. Time scale deals with how Unity handles time stretching, time dilation, and that means that if you, for example, would lower time scale to 0.5, that would slow down your animation and the time between keyframes by 50%. As an example, in my animation, here I have 2 keyframes. They first slow and then speed up time, and I'll be playing it so you see what happens. Check the time scale over here to see. First of all, it slows down as the bullet time animation plays, and then speeds back up. As you saw, even the physics got slowed down. If you see the skirt, it moves in slow motion. Below we have single files, which deals with saves. They are saved as XML files, which you can find in your Bepis plugins. Let me check to make sure. Yep, Bepinex plugins timeline single files folder. Below that we have the help button, which you should be reading. I didn't personally read all of it because I was so excited to try it out, but don't be like me. Read the fucking help file, okay? Here we have the interpolables window. That means this contains everything that can be tracked by Timeline, and there are quite a few things that you can track. I'm gonna go scrub a little through it so you can see. These first 2 ones that I already tracked are the right hand, and this basically means that I am tracking the right hand and the changes that happen to it using the normal axis movement wheel. I probably can't select it now, but you get the gist of it. Like this, for example, you can see it there. Or you could track things separately using KKPE, which has its own separate interpolable. That means that if you want to move something using KKPE, for example, left hand, and you give it a different position like this, you'll have to add the KKPE interpolable for hand. What I should have done to select the wrist when I couldn't, because it was all covered with clutter over here, was go to the interpolables window, right click it, bring up the context menu, and then hit select linked guide object, and that just selects it so you can move it in. It also kind of works the other way a little, as in you can hold Alt down, click the bone that you want, and that will make it flash inside the interpolables window, helping you find it. Now, let's start covering a little more advanced stuff. Right click on interpolable and then you get a context menu. Most of these things are self-explanatory. Some of them I don't know what they do as I have not used them. For example, you can move your interpolables so you can sort them better. This helps a lot when you animate specific body parts and you want to keep everything categorized. Like for example, the left hand, you can start sorting by fingers, then the wrist, then the elbow, and then the shoulder. You can color code them like I have, so it's easier to sort, because at one point you might find yourself getting to a lot of interpolables and a lot of keyframes, and it helps out a lot to be able to color code them and see them properly. For example, look at this shit. And of course you could have a lot more than that. Let's start adding some keyframes so you get a good idea on how keyframes work. First of all, you can add the keyframes anywhere along the time. It doesn't add them necessarily to where the time scrubber is. You have to select your body part or your object or whatever you want to interpolate or add keyframes to, and then add to the specific category you want to change. Here we will be dealing with the wrist, the right wrist, and I'm going to be giving it a movement and a rotation. To be honest, you can add the keyframes whenever. You don't have to be at the end of the animation that you want to do, because you can change the keyframes later. Let me give you an example. I'm going to add one for position, another one, and two for rotation. Be careful because the category is moved, because once you add an interpolable, it goes to the bottom of the list over here and it pushes the other categories down. This is also where sorting your interpolables comes into play, since they get sorted at the bottom of the list. It's gonna get hectic if you don't sort them from the beginning, or if you have a good workflow and you know exactly what you want to do, you can just select the keyframes that you want from the start. So over here, I added all the keyframes when the hand was not moving at all. That means that it interpolates between the same movement, which is doesn't do anything, right? But for example, if I move the hand, select the second keyframe, and then hit use current value, as in the value that it is right now, it will remember this, and now we have two different values that it will try to switch between, as so. Or alternatively, you can just delete it, move the hand where you want it to be, and then add the keyframe then. Depends on how you want to work, but usually I change them after the fact because I sometimes forget things. Now, the reason why I haven't aligned the keyframes for rotation and hand is because some movements are more natural if they are not equal, if they don't start in synchronicity. Let's add some rotation and see if it looks good. Disclaimer, I don't know if it will or it probably won't. This is the end of the rotation, the second keyframe, and let's just add small rotation. Hit the keyframe and use current value. Also, if you scrub through the time, it will use the current value that you're at if you already have one. So for example, if it's right here, when I select this keyframe, the timeline won't jump to it. It's still at the same rotation it is, and I can just change it now. As you saw, the value changed. As expected, it looks like crap. If you want to add keyframes at the same time for multiple interpolables, all you have to do is go to the interpolable window, hold Control, and select the ones that you want. You can also deselect them by holding Control. or use Shift to select a list of them. And just put your mouse over where you want them to go, hold down Alt, and add them like this. And yes, I didn't tell you on purpose which button to press to add keyframes because I want you to go read the help file. Do that first before anything else if you get timeline. That being said, I'm gonna try and teach you a few more advanced things. What dictates how fast an animation is the distance between the keyframes. And, of course, how wide or short the movement is. This is the animation at this speed. If I want it to be faster, I can select all of the keyframes by dragging a box with left click over them, select them all, hold Alt, and then scroll down while holding my mouse over them. This will tighten them a little, will bring the keyframes a little closer together and shortening the animation. As you see, it's a little faster. Or, if for example, I see that the rotation is a little off and I want only the rotation to be faster or slower, I can select one of the keyframes in the rotation, hold Alt, and drag only that with left click. Of course, you can also select multiple keyframes at once, and you can change your animation like that, change its speed, as so. Same deal, use Alt, drag them out. For the purpose of the next step, let's learn how to duplicate keyframes. First, select the keyframes that you want to copy over. I'm selecting these two. Hit Ctrl C to copy. Scrub to the time where you want them pasted, and then just Ctrl V. And there you have it. Now let's talk about keyframe curves. To get a keyframe curve window, just select the keyframe that you want and you'll get the keyframe curve window right here. Now, what are keyframe curves? Curves are basically what dictates how natural a movement is. It means that, for example, here, this is a linear movement. That means that if you would take your hand in real life, the movement would start and finish at exactly the same speed, like this. Let's play the animation alone so you understand better. As you can see, the movement is linear, it's extremely unnatural. So what we would want would be, let's say we want the wrist movement to start as slow and then speed up. So we select a movement like this. As you can see, the starting keyframe curve is a little more squished towards the bottom. That means it will take more for the animation to start ramping up, and then as it goes, it will finish at normal speed. Let's play it a little. As you can see, it looks slightly more natural. It's a little janky because the animation itself is shitty. Let's do the opposite now. Let's select this curve. This means the starting keyframe, the entry keyframe, is linear. That means that the animation will start out fast and end slowly because the curve is more squished towards the end. As so. If you want decently natural movement without much effort, it's best to use this particular keyframe. Here we have two keyframes. And what this one does, as you can see, it starts slow, ramps to normal movement, and then ends slowly. This particular one is good because it lets you link keyframes together with decently natural movement. As you can see, it's a little more natural even on the other keyframe that shows the movement outwards or backwards. The downside to this is sometimes you want keyframe curves that start out fast or slow, and you have to be able to transition into the next keyframe smoothly. So the issue with transitioning to the next keyframe smoothly is something like this. Here I made a new animation, linear, very slow animation. Let's drop to the center of it, add another keyframe, and you'll see this didn't affect it at all, because the curves inside it are linear. But let's say that we want it to start off slow and then pick up the pace when the animation starts, and then the middle keyframe will add the natural curve that works together with other curves of the same nature. If we start the animation now, you'll see that it kind of breaks up. See, it doesn't look natural. So what this basically means is we kind of want to try and make the ends of the curve, the tangents, align in such a way that it seems natural. If you check it like this, you will see that they don't line up. Now let us discuss adding keyframes to the curve. You can add as many keyframes as you want to it, and the purpose they serve is to give you more control, of course, but the more horizontal you make the curves, the more the animation will stop. If it's completely flat, between these two keyframes the animation will completely stagnate, like this. As you saw, it completely stopped. Naturally, the inverse is also applied. If you make the keyframes vertical, or very close to vertical, between these two keyframes the animation will be extremely fast, almost instant. Now there are a few tricks you could use this for, like for example, if you want her to hesitate a little with the hand to pull back, you can make it like this, and between these two keyframes she will slightly retract her hand. What that basically means is the closer the keyframes are to the bottom, the closer they are to the start of the animation. Now if you want to get rid of these keyframes, all you have to do is just use the standard curves and overwrite them. Moving on to an example of integration of KKPE with timeline. Let's say that we want to twist her wrist a little, but instead of using the normal way, we want to use KKPE. We bring up KKPE, select her wrist, we find it in the list, bone rotation right here, let's add a keyframe, we navigate back to where we were, and now we use the rotation from KKPE, and we just add the keyframe where we want it. And now you can see that we get a rotation. You might ask yourself, why would I use KKPE when I can just use the standard rotation? And the answer to that is KKPE gives you more control. It's easier to use the buttons than using the standard animation and rotation. It's less floaty than those. But a more concrete example would be, let's say that you're deep into your animation already and you have a pose for your hand that you have been using. Now, in order to animate using the standard rotator, you would need to turn on FK and IK for it, and then refer to the animation, but that might break several things with the hand animation. So the workaround is, we use KKPE, for example, on the right hand, and go to the fingers that we want to modify and collapse them, and we modify each bone individually using the KKPE tab here in timeline. I would suggest you use bone rotation just because bone position will probably not give you the results that you desire. Now moving on to the integration of RendererEditor with Timeline. RendererEditor does about the same as Material Editor. Maybe it does a little more. But the main thing why you should be using it is because you can interpolate stuff in Timeline with it. Here I'm going to give you an example from my animation of an effect that I made using RendererEditor. And I'm talking about the shockwave that you see. And what I basically did with the shockwave was take spherical energy barrier. Let's bring up RendererEditor by pressing Ctrl R on the keyboard. I replaced its texture with this one. And then I interpolated this value, heat force, which creates a distortion effect. As you see while I'm scrubbing through the timeline, the more heat force goes down, the less distortion there is. Another very nifty and important thing you can do using RendererEditor and Timeline at the same time is you can fade in objects that would not normally be fadeable or have alpha. Like for example, electrical discharge. If you see here, you cannot fade it in, it doesn't have any alpha. But if you use end fade from RendererEditor and interpolate that, you can basically fade in an effect that would not be otherwise fadeable, like so. As you can see, the electrical discharge just slowly comes in. But Yuri, where can I get all of these awesome plugins? I'm pretty sure you already have KKPE and node constraints, since they have been publicly available for some time now. But Timeline and RendererEditor are still in beta, and that means you can only find them on Joan's Patreon. Now, these guys like Joan, especially Joan, because I like the guy a lot, they put a lot of effort into what they do. They make it for free. So if you really want to get Timeline, and I would highly advise you do because there is nothing like it. VNG, as much as I like it, doesn't even come close to it. You should probably check his Patreon page. I'm not saying you should donate. It's not my place to say you should do that. But I do believe that the modders' work in our community should be at least considered, if not rewarded. So if you really want Timeline and RendererEditor 2 weeks before it actually gets released from beta, check out Joan's Patreon. There is also a cheat sheet made by Joan for Timeline containing all the shortcuts that you will need, that I will be linking in the description of this video. It's not really a replacement for reading the help file, but if you did read the help file and just need a quick refresh on what some shortcuts do, then you can use it. And that about does it. This video has dragged on long enough, but before I go, I just want to personally thank everyone that makes all of these awesome tools. You guys are fucking awesome. And also all the people that helped me in my short time from joining this community. Everyone is fucking awesome, so stay awesome.